You lock your front door, you walk to your car, you drive 10 miles to an airport, you sit in a metal tube, you fly 3,000 miles across an ocean. You look down at the water and assume you're doing something entirely new. You think you're the peak of global mobility. But in 2017, a geneticist at the University of Sheffield named Aaron Elhike published a study that shattered that exact assumption. He analyzed the DNA of over 300 ancient skeletons using a genetic geographic population structure system. He wasn't just looking at bones. He was looking for chemical signatures hiding in their teeth. Because here's the thing about your teeth. The water you drink as a child locks specific strontium isotopes into your enamel. It creates a permanent, indestructible chemical map of exactly where you were born. And the results from those ancient teeth broke everything we thought we knew about the Stone Age. Half of those prehistoric people were buried more than 160 miles from where they were born. 30% of them traveled over 600 miles. Some of them walked nearly 2,000 miles before they died. Not per lifetime, just their final resting place compared to their first breath. That's staggering. Not with roads, not with maps, not with shoes. And long before that, exactly 840,000 years ago, stone tools appeared on the Indonesian island of Flores. Flores is a fortress. It sits entirely past the Wallace Line. That's a massive biological boundary. It's completely surrounded by deep, treacherous ocean trenches. It never had a land bridge, not even during the deepest ice ages when the sea levels plummeted and the continents expanded. The only way to get a biologically viable population to that island was to build a raft, coordinate a crew, and intentionally steer directly into the crushing currents of the open sea. And somehow the creature standing on that raft, staring into the horizon, didn't even have the brain of a modern human. They were early hominids. Therefore, the classic image of early humans cowering in local caves is a complete fiction. They weren't just surviving, they were exploring. And they were doing it across environments that would kill a modern survivalist in a day. Let's start with the ocean, because water is the ultimate barrier. For decades, traditional anthropology argued that early hominids only crossed oceans by accident. They claimed a tsunami washed some trees into the sea and people just drifted helplessly to new islands. But drifting is a death sentence. True travel requires intent. To test the absolute technological limit of that 840,000-year-old migration, a maritime researcher named Robert Bednarik built a primitive bamboo raft in January of the year 2000. No steering, no sails, no modern navigation tools whatsoever. His team pushed it into the violent Lombok Strait to see if a prehistoric crossing was even physically possible. The currents were brutal. The raft spun completely out of control. It was battered by massive waves that threatened to tear the bamboo apart. But it crossed. The journey was physically survivable, and they weren't isolated anomalies. 300,000 years ago, early humans crossed the Mediterranean Sea to reach the deep-water isolated island of Sardinia. We know this because researchers found Clactonian stone tools and fossilized bones of Homo erectus inside Sardinian caves. They were sailing long before Homo sapiens even existed. And by the time our direct species entered the picture, navigation had become a high art. 60,000 years ago, humans stood on the shores of Timor and looked south toward Australia. The coast of Australia was completely invisible. Because of the curvature of the Earth, the flat landmass only appears when you've already completed 90% of the journey. They sailed out into a pure, empty horizon for days. They didn't have compasses. They didn't have sextants. Therefore, they learned to read the invisible. They tracked the flight paths of specific seabirds returning to roost. They watched the migration patterns of sea turtles beneath the waves. They looked for unique cumulus clouds that only form over unseen land due to heat reflection. They chased the distant, faint smoke of bushfires burning hundreds of miles away. They steered by the sky. In 1985, a crew led by explorer Bob Hobman demonstrated exactly how powerful this prehistoric method was. They carved a 20-meter-long double outrigger canoe from a single tree trunk. They called it Sarimanok. They launched from Bali and sailed all the way to Madagascar. 7 weeks on the open ocean, navigated exclusively by the stars, eating only Neolithic food, surviving brutal storms with nothing but ancient technology. Decades later, in 2014, Hobman proved it again. His team built a prehistoric reed raft called Melita and sailed 100 kilometers across the open Mediterranean from Kythera to Crete in just 48 hours, perfectly replicating a 130,000-year-old route. The ancient oceans weren't walls, they were highways. We have hard evidence from the Bubog rock shelters in the Philippines and the Goa Topagaro cave in Indonesia, proving that humans were running targeted maritime outposts over 40,000 years ago. But the ocean was only half the story. The continents themselves themselves presented impossible biological barriers. You probably learned in school that the first Americans walked across a massive ice-free land bridge from Siberia about 14,000 years ago. That theory was called Clovis first. It was printed in every textbook. It was the unquestioned gospel of archaeology. But in 2016, a massive DNA analysis of lake sediments proved that the massive inland corridor was a biological death zone. Up until 12,600 years ago, there were no plants, there were no animals, there was no wood for fire. If you walked into that corridor, you starved. Therefore, the first Americans didn't walk through the ice. They arrived thousands of years earlier. In 1997, an archaeologist named Tom Dillahay excavated a site in Chile called Monte Verde. He found human artifacts dating back 18,500 years. That completely destroyed the land bridge timeline. They bypassed the frozen wasteland entirely by taking boats down the Pacific coast. They navigated through dense, terrifying ocean kelp forests. This was the Kelp Highway. Now, some of you are thinking, well, they only moved when they absolutely had to. You assume they were just running out of food, so they took the next valley over. But the genetics tell a completely different story. The ancient world was a chaotic, high-speed collision of migrating groups intentionally trading genes across entire continents. Take the Neanderthals. In 2014, geneticist Svante Pääbo sequenced the Neanderthal genome from a bone found in an Altai mountain cave. His work showed that Neanderthals lived in Europe and Asia. They never lived south of the Sahara Desert. And yet, researchers recently discovered tiny fragments of Neanderthal DNA in modern sub-Saharan African populations. That genetic echo is the result of an uninterrupted 8,000-mile reverse migration back deep into Africa. They didn't just expand outward, they turned around. They walked back. And it wasn't just a one-way trip. They built massive continental networks of trade. In 2020, archaeologists analyzed pieces of red ochre found across Australia. Red ochre was the ancient world's most valuable paint. By looking at the unique chemical fingerprint of the ochre, they tracked exactly where it came from. Ancient Aboriginal Australians were moving ochre across a distance of over 300 miles through the harsh, brutal desert. They passed it from group to group, navigating sand dunes and salt lakes just to share a color. The map of human history was constantly being rewritten by feet, which makes what happens next the strangest paradox of our entire evolution. When humans finally invented farming, the exact thing that was supposed to make us civilized, we stopped moving. The spread of agriculture across Europe wasn't a sudden, glorious march. It was a painfully slow demographic diffusion. It moved at a speed of exactly 1 kilometer per year. That's a rounding error in prehistoric travel. We traded the entire planet for a single field. We traded the kelp highway for a grain silo. We traded the horizon for a fence. Modern psychology often looks at human restlessness as a flaw. We call it an inability to focus. We medicate it. We suppress it. Today, you check your phone while sitting in the airport terminal, annoyed that your flight is delayed by 20 minutes. You sleep in a hotel bed and complain about the air conditioning. You travel to escape your life for a week. They traveled because movement was their life. You look at a digital map to see exactly where you're going. They looked at a blank horizon and steered a bamboo raft directly into it, betting their lives on a bird in the sky and a cloud over the water. That deeply ingrained urge to see what's on the other side of the ocean didn't just disappear when we built cities. It became trade. It became science. It became you, staring out the window of a train at 2 in the morning, wondering what lies past the tree line. You aren't running away. You're just doing what humans have always done. You're exploring. At least that's the story I let myself believe. But there's a hole in it so big it should keep you awake. Crossing an ocean on a raft is one impossible thing. But go back and read those ancient teeth again. Most of that staggering distance wasn't sailed. It was walked on foot by a soft, clawless, fangless animal with no armor, no venom, and no speed. Any predator on that savanna should have caught your ancestor in a single afternoon. So how does a barefoot creature out-travel a horse? The answer is that you are not a weak, furless ape. You are a machine built for distance, and almost every strange thing about your body is a clue. In 2004, a researcher named Dennis Bramble at the University of Utah, working with Harvard biologist Daniel Lieberman, laid the evidence out. Reach down and feel your Achilles tendon. Your tree-climbing ancestor Australopithecus didn't have a working one at all. Yours acts like a heavy mechanical spring. It stretches when your foot lands, stores the impact, and snaps it back to throw you forward. That single tendon cuts the energy cost of running by exactly 50%. Now feel your backside. A chimpanzee is almost flat there. You carry a massive muscle, the gluteus maximus, and here's the strange part. It barely fires when you walk. It only wakes up when you run, purely to stop your body from pitching face first into the dirt with every stride. Even your flat face is an adaptation. It pushed the weight of your skull backward so your head would stop bobbing and blurring your vision supersonic speed. You were engineered, piece by piece, over 2 million years for one terrifying task. But a gazelle is still faster than you. An antelope will leave you standing in 10 seconds. So you never tried to win the sprint. You won the hours. You jog at a steady 20 kilometers an hour through tropical heat while the animal bolts away in a panic. Then it has to stop in the shade to cool down. And you keep coming. Because you hold a trump card nothing else on that plane has. You sweat, they pant, and a four-legged animal physically cannot pant while it gallops, because its own organs slam into its lungs with every stride. In 1984, a researcher named David Carrier proved that standing upright unlocked your breathing from your steps entirely. A running dog is trapped at 1 breath per stride. You breathe on your own terms. So while the animal overheats, you stay cool, and after 20 to 40 kilometers, it simply collapses from the heat. You walk up to it and end it with a rock. 80% of the time, it worked. The oldest wooden spear on Earth is only 400,000 years old, yet your ancestors were bringing down giants for more than 1 million years before that weapon existed. But you were racing your own clock, too. In 2020, Dr. Martin Hora in Prague found a hard limit. 5.5 hours in that heat with no water, and your own blood thickens and kills you. You were always gambling your life against the stamina of your prey. And running didn't just feed you. In 2016, Dr. Jay Shulkin found that all that distance physically grew the memory center of your brain, because you had to remember the way home. You ran, and running made you smarter. So here you are, lying awake at 2 in the morning, in a body built for infinite distance, in a world that asks you to walk to the fridge. That restlessness you medicate, that itch to move, that pull toward the horizon. It was never a flaw. It's the oldest, truest part of you. Still running, still waiting for you to answer it.